soft and cozy. My name is Cassandra Cassie Webb, and I'm 33 years old. 5 years ago, my mother called me 4 days before Christmas and said 8 words that dismantled everything I believed about family. Don't come home this year. Braille needs her peace. No explanation, no apology, just a door quietly shut on 28 years of trying to earn my place. I spent that Christmas Eve alone in a coffee shop in Seattle, watching strangers carry wrapped presents through the rain while I sat with a lukewarm hot chocolate and nowhere to be. I had no idea that the woman at the corner table reading a battered novel would become, in time, the mother I'd always needed. I had no idea that 5 years later, she and her husband would be introduced at my wedding as the parents of the bride, while my biological parents stood in the back of a vineyard reception hall, realizing they'd been replaced in every way that truly counts. But before I tell you what happened, take a moment to like and subscribe, only if this story resonates with you, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let me take you back to the phone call that started everything. It was December 21st. I know the date exactly because I'd been marking the days off on a little paper calendar I kept on my desk, counting down to the flight home. I was in my studio apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, surrounded by Christmas cards I hadn't sent yet and a half-decorated tree I'd bought because I thought it would make my apartment feel less empty during the holidays. A pine-scented candle was burning on the windowsill. Mom's name lit up my phone screen. I smiled and answered, "Hey, Mom, I was just about to—" "Cassie," her voice was flat, careful, the way she sounded when she was about to deliver news she'd already decided she wasn't going to apologize for. "I need to talk to you about Christmas." My stomach dropped. That particular tone had never once in my life meant anything good. "Okay, what's going on? Is Dad all right?" "Your father is fine." A pause. She always paused when she wanted her next sentence to land harder. "We've been talking, and it would be better if you didn't come home this year." I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "I'm sorry, what?" "Brielle is going through something. You know how fragile she is right now. She needs this Christmas to be calm. She doesn't need the tension." I gripped the phone tighter. "What tension, Mom? I haven't spoken to Brielle in 4 months. I've been completely out of the picture." "Exactly." A slight edge crept into her voice. "And she's finally in a good place. I don't want to risk that." "By having me home? For Christmas? With my own family?" "You always say things. You always make her feel judged." I stood very still by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. "I made her feel judged," I repeated slowly, "because I asked her once why she didn't invite me to her engagement party? That was the whole conversation, Mom. I asked one question. You know how she is. So I'm being punished because she's sensitive." "Cassie," her voice hardened into its final shape, the one that meant the conversation was over whether I wanted it to be or not. "Your sister needs this. I've already bought her favorite things for Christmas dinner. I need you to understand." "Mom, I already bought my plane ticket. Can you get credit on it?" I stared at the wall. "You're serious? This isn't about you." The line didn't go dead. She waited for me to absorb it, which was somehow worse. I understood. I'd been the acceptable sacrifice for 28 years. But as I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed and stared at the confirmation email for my flight, something else moved through me alongside the hurt. A dark and familiar recognition. This was not the first time. The memories don't require effort to access. They're always right there, filed neatly under proof. My 15th birthday. I'd been planning a sleepover for weeks. Mom had promised cake, movies, the works. 4 of my closest friends were coming. The afternoon of, Brielle called from a friend's house crying because she'd had a falling out with a boy she liked. She needed to come home. She needed Mom. The sleepover was canceled. I sat on the porch in the dark after my friends' parents came to collect them, watching headlights sweep across the lawn. Mom came out for 30 seconds to say, "Don't be dramatic, Cassie. There will be other birthdays." There weren't. Not like that. Then there was my college graduation. first in my family to graduate summa cum laude. I'd worked nights at a coffee shop for 3 years to cover what my scholarship didn't. I walked across that stage and looked into the audience at the exact moment I'd imagined 100 times, looking for my parents' faces. The seats where I told them to sit were empty. They arrived an hour and 40 minutes late. Brielle had an anxiety episode in the car, and they had to pull over 3 times. You understand, sweetheart, she can't help it. More important than me was the unspoken sentence that always followed. I learned young not to push back. When I did, I became too sensitive, difficult, exhausting to deal with. So I adapted. I made myself quieter, smaller, less inconvenient. I thought if I was easy enough, agreeable enough, invisible enough, I would finally earn the love they seemed to give my sister without her having to work for it at all. 28 years old, sitting on my bed with a non-refundable plane ticket. I finally understood. There was no version of invisible enough. I called my father. I think some part of me was still holding a small, stubborn belief that he would say something, that this time would be different. It rang 5 times. "Hey, kiddo." His voice was cautious. He already knew. "Dad, did Mom tell you?" "She mentioned it, yeah." "And? You think that's okay?" A long pause. In the background, I could hear the television, some home improvement show he watched on weeknights. You know how things get between you two. Between me and Mom, or between me and Brielle? All of it. It's just easier this year if I'm not there. Silence. "Dad," I tipped my voice level. "Do you actually want me to come home?" I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think, he said finally, "it's probably better to follow your mother's lead on this one." Something inside me went very, very quiet. "Okay, Dad." "Cassie, don't. It's not like I don't. It's okay. It wasn't. Merry Christmas." I ended the call. He didn't call back. I sat in the growing dark, watching the candle on my windowsill burn lower. My father had been given a clear and simple choice, say one word in my defense, and he had chosen the path of least resistance, which happened to run directly through me. As the room went dark, a quieter feeling arrived behind the grief. Not peace exactly, more like clarity. If I wasn't welcome at their table, I would have to find or build a table of my own. Christmas Eve arrived gray and wet, the way Seattle Christmases usually are. I woke up to the sound of my neighbor's apartment filling with family, voices rising and falling through the thin wall, a child's shriek of excitement, something being dropped and then laughter. A pine-scented candle was burning on the windowsill. Mom's name lit up my phone screen. I smiled and answered. "Hey, Mom, I was just about to—" "Cassie?" Her voice was flat, careful, the way she sounded when she was about to deliver news she'd already decided she wasn't going to apologize for. "I need to talk to you about Christmas." My stomach dropped. That particular tone had never once in my life meant anything good. "Okay, what's going on? Is Dad all right?" "Your father is fine." A pause. She always paused when she wanted her next sentence to land harder. "We've been talking, and it would be better if you didn't come home this year." I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "I'm sorry, what?" "Brielle is going through something. You know how fragile she is right now. She needs this Christmas to be calm. She doesn't need the tension." I gripped the phone tighter. "What tension, Mom? I haven't spoken to Brielle in 4 months. I've been completely out of the picture." "Exactly." A slight edge crept into her voice. "And she's finally in a good place. I don't want to risk that." "By having me home for Christmas with my own family? You always say things. You always make her feel judged." I stood very still by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. "I made her feel judged," I repeated slowly, "because I asked her once why she didn't invite me to her engagement party? That was the whole conversation, Mom. I asked one question. You know how she is. So I'm being punished because she's sensitive. Cassie," her voice hardened into its final shape, the one that meant the conversation was over whether I wanted it to be or not. "Your sister needs this. I've already bought her favorite things for Christmas dinner. I need you to understand." "Mom, I already bought my plane ticket. Can you get credit on it?" I stared at the wall. "You're serious. This isn't about you." The line didn't go dead. She waited for me to absorb it, which was somehow worse. I understood. I'd been the acceptable sacrifice for 28 years, but as I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed and stared at the confirmation email for my flight, something else moved through me alongside the hurt, a dark and familiar recognition. This was not the first time. The memories don't require effort to access. They're always right there, filed neatly under proof. My 15th birthday. I'd been planning a sleepover for weeks. Mom had promised cake, movies, the works. 4 of my closest friends were coming. The afternoon of, Brielle called from a friend's house crying because she'd had a "You could," she smiled. "Think about it." She walked out into the Seattle rain, and I stood there in the warm cafe holding her card, feeling, for the first time in a long time, like maybe I hadn't been entirely erased. I didn't call Margaret the next week, or the week after. It felt too forward, like I was claiming a connection that wasn't mine to claim. But she called me, just to check in, she said, just to see how the holidays had settled. We talked for 45 minutes. By the time mid-January arrived, I had agreed to the Sunday dinner. I stood on Margaret's porch in the Madrona neighborhood for nearly 10 minutes before knocking. The house was older, a craftsman with a wide porch and warm light in every window. It looked like the kind of house where things were figured out and kept. Margaret opened the door before I could change my mind. "You came!" She hugged me like I'd been expected. Inside, controlled chaos. Daniel's kids, Theo, who was 9, and June, who was 6, were building something elaborate with couch cushions. His wife, Rosa, was in the kitchen arguing cheerfully with someone on the phone about a recipe. Daniel himself was setting the table with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He shook my hand. "Daniel, good to finally meet you. Mom told us about Christmas Eve." "Good things, I hope?" "All good things," he smiled. "She's very selective about who she invites to Sunday dinners." Theo looked up from the cushion fortress. "Are you Mom's friend or Grandma's friend?" "Grandma's, I think." He considered this. "Okay. Do you want to be in the fort? It fits 4, but June keeps changing the rules." I laughed, a real one, sudden and unguarded. "Maybe after dinner," I said. That was the first of many Sundays. Over the next several months, I became a steady presence at Margaret's table. She taught me to play backgammon, which I was terrible at for a long time, before something clicked and I became almost passably decent. She showed me the garden in the backyard, which Thomas had planted and which she maintained with the same careful attention she gave to everything she loved. I heard all the stories: Thomas, the law career, the Chicago years, the slow decision to move west. Daniel's kids started calling me Aunt Cassie without prompting or direction. And Daniel's younger colleague, his childhood best friend actually, a landscape architect named Will Haverford, no relation, which we confirmed immediately, became a fixture in the Sunday dinner rotation the same month I did. We ended up seated next to each other the first 3 weeks in a row, which nobody seemed to think was accidental. Will was easy to talk to in the way that few people are. Genuinely curious, unhurried, funny without trying to be. We texted movie opinions. We argued about the best hiking trails outside the city. We showed up to Sunday dinners and somehow always ended up in the same conversation. During those months, I did not hear a single word from my biological family. No call, no text, no birthday message in March, which was a first. For the first time in my adult life, I did not notice the silence immediately. I was too busy not shrinking. 18 months after that first Christmas Eve, Margaret and I were sitting on her back porch with tea. The garden was coming up nicely. Tulips first, then the climbing roses Thomas had planted along the fence. "Have you thought about reaching out to them?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said, "usually late at night." "What stops you?" "There's nothing to explain. They know what they did, they just don't believe it was wrong. Margaret turned her cup in her hands. That's the hardest kind of situation, when the person who hurt you doesn't share your understanding of reality. Everyone tells me blood is blood, that I should find a way to forgive. Forgiveness, Margaret said carefully, is a personal process. It doesn't require reconciliation. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself from them. She paused. Can I tell you something I've been thinking about for a while? I looked at her. During my legal career, one of the areas I worked in, through legal aid mostly, was adult adoption, helping people formalize the families they'd built rather than the ones assigned to them. She looked at me steadily. The law can recognize chosen family as official, legal, permanent family. New birth certificate, legal next of kin, parental rights and responsibilities fully recognized. I was quiet. I'm not suggesting anything, she said, just letting you know it exists, that it's real, and that I know how it works. She patted my hand and changed the subject to whether the climbing roses needed to be cut back. But the words stayed with me. It happened the way things do when they've been inevitable for a long time, gradually, then all at once. 2 years after Christmas Eve at the Lighthouse Cafe, Will and I stopped being friends who always sat together at Sunday dinners and became something that had a different name, one we both recognized at the same moment without needing to announce it. He asked me to dinner at the Lighthouse Cafe. Back to the beginning, he said. We sat in a booth near the window, and he adjusted the salt shaker 3 times, which is how I knew he was nervous. I want to say this right, he started. Then just say it. He looked at me across the table. Cassie, I've been trying to figure out the exact right words for about 6 months. I don't think there are exact right words. So I'll just say, I want to spend my life choosing you. My breath caught. I know what your family put you through. I know you've spent years believing you were too much, too difficult, too exhausting to be loved the way you deserved. His voice was steady. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that wrong, one day at a time. He put a small velvet box on the table between us. Cassandra Webb, will you marry me? I looked at this man, who had been my friend first, who had listened and argued and showed up and made me laugh and never once made me feel like I was too much. And I saw clearly and without doubt my future. Yes, obviously yes. He put the ring on my finger. The restaurant applauded. I hadn't noticed anyone watching. And then I saw them in the corner, booth closest to the window. Margaret and Daniel and Rosa, with champagne already poured, beaming. She planned this, I said. She absolutely planned this, Will confirmed. I was going to become officially part of their orbit. I was going to be family. We began planning immediately. The venue, the flowers, the food, the music. It was wonderful and overwhelming, and nothing I'd ever let myself fully imagine before, because somewhere underneath every dream of a wedding was the old question: who would be there? Who would I be to them? The invitation design question hit me in the middle of the night 3 weeks into planning. Parents of the bride. That line. I lay in the dark thinking about it. Roger and Linda Webb. They hadn't spoken to me in over 2 years, hadn't acknowledged my birthday, hadn't reached out when my apartment flooded in October and I had to stay with Margaret for a week. They had ceased in an active sense to act like my family. I could not put their names on my wedding invitation. They hadn't earned that honor. They hadn't earned the seat. I brought it to Margaret the following Sunday. I paced her living room explaining the problem until she gently sat me down. I mentioned something to you once, adult adoption. I remembered. Is that something, I started. Thomas and I always spoke of you as if you were ours. I've spoken about you that way since the second Sunday you came to dinner. I don't want to put pressure on you, but if you're asking whether I would want to make it official, she smiled. I was waiting for you to be ready. I felt something in my chest open like a window. Will you adopt me? She pulled me into a hug before the question was fully finished. Daniel already said yes when I asked him months ago, she whispered. We've been waiting. The process took 4 months. Paperwork, court dates, filings, hearings. Margaret guided every step with the expertise of someone who'd done it professionally and the tenderness of someone who meant every word of it. When the judge signed the final order, I was legally Cassandra Webb Haverford. I had a new birth certificate. I had a legal mother on record. The wedding invitations went out 6 weeks later. Parents of the bride, Margaret Haverford. I'd agonized for 20 minutes over that line. Then I printed it, and it looked exactly right. I should have known my biological family would eventually find out. 3 months before the wedding, Brielle texted me for the first time in almost 3 years. I saw the notification, confirmed it was real, and blocked the number. A week later, my mother called 4 times in a day. I let them go to voicemail. Then a text. "We heard you're getting married. Why wouldn't you tell your own family? Call me." I read it twice, deleted it. 3 years of silence, 3 years of living as if I didn't exist, and now, suddenly, a daughter. I wasn't angry exactly. I'd moved through anger a long time ago. I was tired in the way that comes from carrying something heavy for too long after you've already set it down. Will found me staring at my phone that evening. "Your family?" "They found out about the wedding." He sat beside me. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing," I said. "I don't owe them anything." He nodded and put his arm around me, and that was that. Except it wasn't. The Webbs were not the kind of family that accepted being ignored. She appeared at my apartment on a Thursday afternoon. I was working at my kitchen table reviewing proofs for a client when the doorbell rang. I opened it without checking first. My mother stood in the hallway. She looked older than I'd expected, given the soft and cozy. When the officiant pronounced us married and we turned to face the room, the applause was the warmest sound I'd ever heard. At the reception, the first hour was perfect. Then the security guard appeared at my elbow. "Mrs. Haverford Webb, there are 2 individuals at the entrance. They claim to be your parents." I had expected this. Some part of me had been tracking the possibility all day. Will materialized beside me. "Your biological family?" "Yes." "What do you want to do?" I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. "Let them in," I told the guard. "Put them in the back, not with the family. I want them to see. I want them to see what they lost, what they chose not to be part of, what was built in the space they left." Will looked at me. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." They let them in. The MC stepped to the microphone as the room settled. "Before we continue, I want to take a moment to recognize someone very special." I watched from across the room. My mother, Linda Webb, was near the back, scanning faces, trying to orient herself. My father stood behind her with his hands in his pockets. Would everyone please join me in welcoming the parents of the bride, Margaret Haverford? Margaret stood from the head table, beaming, accepting the applause with the gracious warmth of someone who had earned every bit of it. Daniel whooped. The kids clapped. Will squeezed my hand. Across the room, I watched my mother's face change. The confusion, the recalibration, the slow, cold comprehension. She reached for my father's arm. He was already staring at the head table, where a woman he'd never seen was being celebrated as my mother by 100 people who all clearly knew and loved her. Linda pushed through the crowd before I could intercept her. She reached me as the applause faded. "Who is that woman?" Her voice was a rough whisper. "My legal mother. I was adopted 2 years ago." She actually took a step back. "You replaced us?" "I didn't replace you," I said. "You left. They arrived. The order matters." "We never left. You told me not to come home for Christmas. You spent 3 years in silence. You didn't come to find me until you found out I was getting married without you in the program." I kept my voice low and steady. "I'm not angry, Mom, but I want you to understand the sequence of events." Around us, conversations had stilled. Guests were watching. My father stepped forward. He looked older, more worn than the last time I'd seen him. His eyes were wet. "Cassie," his voice was uneven. "Dad, He stopped, swallowed. I owe you an apology that I should have given you years ago. I waited. I knew what was happening. I watched it happen for 30 years, and I told myself it was better to keep the peace, that it wasn't that bad, that you were strong enough to handle it. He wiped his eye with the back of his hand. I was a coward. I chose the easier path, and you paid for it. I'm sorry. The words I'd spent 30 years waiting for. And they were too late, not because I couldn't hear them, I heard them, but because sorry doesn't rewrite the years. It doesn't give back the birthdays and the graduations and the Christmases. It opens a door that may, in time, lead somewhere, but it doesn't undo the walk. I hear you, Dad, I said. I believe you. Can we... Not today. Gently, but completely. Today is my wedding day. But I hear you. My mother started to speak. Margaret appeared quietly at my shoulder before she could. Linda's eyes went to her, sharp and cold. You're the one who did this. Margaret's expression didn't waver. I'm the one who had dinner with your daughter on Christmas Eve when she had nowhere to go. Everything after that was her choice. My father, Roger Webb, looked at her. We should have been better, he said. Not to Margaret, to me. We should have been better. Then Margaret's son Daniel stepped forward. This is Cassie's wedding day. She has invited you here to witness what she's built. I think that's a gift, not something to be taken for granted. If you'd like to stay and celebrate her, please do. If you can't do that, then I think it's better that you go. He nodded to the security team, who moved to flank the Webbs gently. My mother looked at me one final time. This isn't over. Today it is, I said. Goodbye, Mom. They were escorted out into the evening. The room was quiet for one breath. Then Will put his arm around me, and the band started playing, and it was over. We danced until midnight. Margaret and I had the mother-daughter dance to a song we'd chosen together, a quiet, gentle thing that made us both cry and then laugh at ourselves for crying. Richard and Daniel and Rosa and the kids all crowded around us. June fell asleep on a folding chair at 9:30, still clutching a piece of cake. The next morning, on the first day of our honeymoon, my phone began to fill with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Most were variations on, "You broke your mother's heart." I deleted them without responding. But one was from my father's younger sister, Aunt Vivienne, who I had last seen at a family reunion 12 years ago. Cassie, I heard what happened. I'm proud of you. I watched what Linda and Brielle did to you when you were young, and I didn't say enough. I'm sorry for that. You deserved better. You always did. I wrote back, thank you. That means more than you know. On social media, my mother posted a long and wounded statement about betrayal and chosen family replacing real family. I didn't respond. I blocked the account and moved on. That evening, I stood on the balcony of her honeymoon suite and watched the river go bronze in the sunset. Will came out and stood behind me, his arms around me. You okay? Yes, I said, and I was. 2 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived at our new address. Brielle's handwriting, loopy, deliberate, the handwriting she'd practiced years to look elegant. I opened it. Dear Cassie, I'm writing because I think you deserve to hear from me. Mom came home from your wedding devastated. Dad has barely spoken since. I know we haven't always been close. I know Mom was hard on you sometimes, but you have to understand she was only trying to protect our family's peace. When you'd push back or ask questions, it created tension for everyone. I know you don't see it that way, but maybe someday you'll understand. I'm not angry, Mom. I just want you to understand the sequence of events. I'm not angry. I still love you. I hope you can find it in your heart to come back to the family eventually. But I also understand if you can't. Your sister, Brielle. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in a drawer. Will came home to find me in the kitchen starting dinner. Letter from Brielle, I said. What did she say? Nothing new. Does it bother you? I thought about it. Really thought about it. No, I said. Understanding is her work, not mine. I stopped waiting for her to do it years ago. A year later, Will and I had bought a house in the Madrona neighborhood, 3 blocks from Margaret, which was exactly the distance we'd agreed on. Close enough to walk to Sunday dinners, far enough for a life. I was senior art director at a design studio I'd always admired. Will's firm was growing steadily. We had a backyard garden that Thomas probably planted a version of, according to Margaret, and we tended it with the same attention. And I was pregnant. Margaret cried when we told her. Theo asked immediately whether the baby would be better at backgammon than me, a low bar, he noted helpfully. June started designing a room plan she wasn't asked for. One Sunday afternoon, Margaret and I were painting the nursery. "Have you thought about names?" she asked. "If she's a girl, Violet. Violet Grace Haverford Webb." She set down her brush. "The Haverford part," I said. "She should have the name of the family that chose her mother." Margaret hugged me for a long time. "You know, when I saw you sitting alone in that cafe on Christmas Eve, I didn't know where it would lead. I just saw someone who needed kindness, someone who'd been told for too long that they were too much. You saved my life that night. No, you saved your own life. You walked out the door instead of staying home. You came to Sunday dinner even when it was scary. You let yourself be loved." She held my shoulders. "We just made room." I looked around the nursery, the crib Margaret had helped me choose, the rocking chair Will had refinished, the painting June had made and insisted on hanging. I was home. 5 years to the day I walked into the Lighthouse Cafe alone on Christmas Eve, I sat at the head of a table that felt like it had always existed and that I had also built from scratch. The Sunday dinner that week had expanded to accommodate what we now called the whole crew. Margaret at one end, Daniel and Rosa wrangling Theo and June, who were now significantly more opinionated, Will's hand finding mine under the table, and Violet, 6 months old, being passed from lap to lap like the most precious thing anyone in the room had ever held, which she was. Margaret clapped her hands for quiet. "Before we eat, Cassie, would you do the honors?" I stood up, Violet on my hip, and looked around the table at these people, my people. 5 years tonight, I was sitting alone in a cafe a few miles from here, wondering if there was something fundamentally wrong with me. I had been told my whole life that I was too much, too sensitive, too dramatic, too difficult to love without conditions. I paused. Violet grabbed my finger. And then a stranger named Margaret Haverford looked up from her book and said, "I'd rather have company than not." Margaret pressed her napkin to her eyes. "So here is my toast. To family. Not the one we're born into, but the one we recognize, the one we build, the one that sees us